Hey, everybody. This is Gabrielle and Sharice with In Session Podcast. We are so excited to be here for another episode. As always, Sharice, what are we chatting about?
We are so excited. Welcome to episode 2 of season 4. Welcome back. Today we are talking about high functioning depression. And so this is a term that describes a type of depression, but in the DSM, which is like our dictionary for diagnosis, it's actually persistent depressive disorder, but we'll refer to it as high functioning depression because that is a term that gets thrown around when we're talking about this and what it presents like. And so where do you want to start with that?
Yeah. First of all, I love this topic because I think most of us at some point or the other had an image of what we thought depression looked like. And for a lot of people, maybe the image looks like, oh, I'm not getting out of bed, or I'm crying all the time, or I'm not able to take a shower, brush my teeth, etc. And that certainly can be an indicator of a type of depression and things like that. But high functioning depression gets under the radar a bunch because so many experience it and they still keep doing life. So I love the fact that we're touching on this because I think it can normalize what a lot of people feel, but also it can help raise a flag like, hey, if you're having some of these signs and symptoms, even if you are making it somehow, potentially you have this high functioning depression diagnosis.
Right. I love that, you said the awareness of raising the flag because I think even for therapists, it can be hard to catch when a client is presenting with high functioning depression because what it looks like is essentially they are having different symptoms of depression, but they're still functioning well. They're still going to work, they're still going to school, they're still handling things. And so I think on the outside, people can say, oh my goodness, you're doing so well, you're successful, you're doing great in life. But on the inside, it's really this internal battle of I'm not feeling well. I feel like I don't have any energy. Every task that I do feels like it takes tremendous amount of effort, but I'm still going to get it done. And so I think people have the tendency that struggle with this to say, well, I'm still functioning, so it's not that bad. I might not need help because, hey, look, I'm successful here. Everything's in order, but inside they're really drowning. And so do you see clients present with that and they're like, well, it's not that bad?
Absolutely. And I think what's really tricky as a clinician is, once you're abreast of what this looks like and the potential for this being a diagnosis for someone, you will get pushback occasionally because, again, that image of what we think depression looks like can be so pervasive in our culture and in our media that if you have a client who you suspect could have high functioning depression because they've never defined it in terms like that or they haven't come to terms with it, you're almost trying to, I want to say convince them, but it's like, hey, could this be a thing? And I actually had a client one time who met the criteria for high functioning depression. And, that client was like, oh, I don't know. I didn't think I was depressed because I was still going to school and I still, kept my job. I still paid my bills. And we kind of look at, well, the outcome. Sure, I still paid the bill that month or I still went to class, but what was the energy level like when you did that? What amount of effort did it require? How did you feel before, during, and after? And if you were under some type of emotional distress, or if it was really difficult or more difficult than it should be, even though it got done, that doesn't mean that we were functioning at our best. And so I think just helping clients realize that even if you've dealt with something and it's your normal, doesn't mean that it's clinically normal, if that makes sense.
For sure. Yeah, I think for clinicians, it's being able to raise that awareness for them in a gentle way because sometimes it is that, no, like I was functioning fine and they have the tendency to minimize it. But then also with this specific like high functioning depression disorder, you have to experience it for 2 years or more. Mm-hmm. And so the person that's in front of you on the couch or in the room, they've probably been experiencing this for a while. And so just to come in and say, oh, well, I think it's this, you're like blowing up their world because they've been functioning and they felt like this was normal. And so I feel like having a really gentle approach and saying, hey, like Gabrielle was saying, look at the outcome. You've been doing well here, here, and here, but look at how you're feeling. Nothing has changed in how you're feeling. And I have clients like that who've come in and therapy's helped, but they still feel an internal battle, even though their outcomes are still the same, right? And so that's a point to bring up like, hey, we've been working here for a while and this pattern is still really persistent. What do you think that's about? And then also I think there's a lot to do with the thoughts. Mm-hmm. When clients come in, maybe they don't want to feel like a burden or their problems aren't big or they don't want to like make the problem seem like the biggest deal in the world. And so you as a clinician have to really meet them where they're at and help them understand why this could be a potential pattern and how to find coping skills to do something different.
Absolutely. And something we kind of jotted down was that this high functioning depression is more of an internal struggle as opposed to an external, like witness, or ooh, this is what everybody is seeing. And that's really important, because sometimes if we're dealing with things on an internal level, we will rationalize it away. We will kind of minimize it because we don't see any external evidence that this is a problem. And I don't know what that's about, but I think sometimes with clients, if there's no external evidence that, okay, my job is in jeopardy, I'm not taking care of my hygiene, something like that, we can kind of minimize, like, oh, it'll be all right, or oh, it's not that bad. Not realizing that even though it's an internal struggle and maybe not external, that's still not okay. And I think for what I see with a lot of clients is that at some point, there's a dip in their ability to sustain this. And so if, let's say, 2 or more years you're dealing with this high functioning depression, if we leave it untreated indefinitely, at some point that high functioning is going to go to medium functioning, and medium functioning to low. You know what I mean?
Yeah, one thing that I noticed was that sometimes when clients have this persistent depression that's ongoing, something like a life stressor or a major event could happen, and that triggers a major depressive episode, and they'll come in and they'll be like, hey, this event just happened, I feel really bad, when really internally they were feeling bad to some degree all along, but the major event that happened kind of made them spiral deeper into their depression. And so it presents as major depressive disorder, which is, it severely limits functioning. And so with, I think, high functioning depression, it limits functioning a little bit or maybe mildly, but the person is still able to function, like we said. And so I think when that life event or stressor happens, it's like this big event, like, oh my goodness, I didn't know like how this happened or what's going on for me. I feel really bad. But really over the 2 years or however long, symptoms are building onto each other, and it wasn't sustainable, like Gabrielle was saying. And so I think if you can catch this early and you notice this pattern, it's really helpful to get help earlier on, because it can spiral into something that's harder to climb yourself out of.
Absolutely. And I think in my mind, when I have a visual of this, it's almost like, let's say, water running down on a rock or something, right? Like immediately you don't notice that rock surface begins to deteriorate. But over time, if that water pressure keeps running over that rock, keeps running over that stone, it does start to deplete the resources, and there is a deterioration that happens. And for a lot of us, we may not pay attention to things like that because, oh, it's okay for the moment, or it's not that bad. But again, that water is still happening, meaning life is still coming, and challenges and stressors and anxieties, etc. And so if you are dealing with high functioning depression, even if things are okay enough for the present moment, because life is still happening, like Cherie said, if there's ever a major event and my resources were already getting depleted, if I already was starting to have signs of wear and tear, that could completely bottom me out. And now I'm at zero. And now I have to climb out of this really big hole that was already growing, right? But if we were to address it a little bit earlier, the hole wouldn't be as big. And that takes a lot of courage, I think, because if life is okay, do I want to have to grapple with the fact that, man, everything's not as okay as I think it is or as I've made it seem? Do I want to have to get help and admit, like, yeah, I'm doing life, but I'm not happy. I'm getting the things done, but for some reason, I just am not feeling the joy that I should. That takes a lot of courage to admit.
Not being happy is a big sign. I think this can present as also being perfectionistic. And so on the outside, it's like, yeah, everything's fine, everything's great. And the outside world sees you as that way too, and you want to maintain that image. But on the inside, it's like, man, I still have all these accomplishments. I can reach this goal. I can do really well here, but I am not okay inside. I do not feel happy. Why don't I feel happy? And then I think you feel guilty. It's like, I have all these things and it looks good. How come I can't be happy? And so guilt compiles, and it just makes the feeling worse. Yeah. And so I think sometimes the cycle of thoughts can get you down. And so one, it's like the outside image I need to maintain. And so that is so much pressure, right? And then the internal is like, well, I am doing that, but I don't feel good about it. So now internally, I don't feel good about the external. And so nothing about yourself feels really good. It feels like you're questioning or you're doubtful. And so I really think, if you're in this pattern, like I said, getting help earlier on can be important, but it's also important to have an open mind when you're getting help of, hey, there is something that's going on. It's something that I don't know how to fix on my own, or I'm not sure how it developed into this, and being very open-minded to what your therapist is trying to help you with, because it does take that awareness, but then it also takes behavior change. Yeah. And like Gabrielle was saying, I think that can be really scary because you might have to stop some things. You might have to reassess what's important to you, what's going to make you happy. And usually what I find is that it's lowering expectations. Not to say like they need to go to the ground, right? But it's like expectations sometimes are, I should be this, or I should be perfect, or I should just let the water run over the rock forever because, hey, that's what I'm used to. And as a therapist, I think I like to enlighten my clients to, hey, there's a different way that we can do this. And that might look like changing your expectations to what you believe is going to make you happy, not what other people say or what society says about general happiness.
Yeah. I think it's all about embracing this new way of living, this new normal, and accepting that maybe how I thought or how I functioned or what I believed or what I expected may not be what's best for me in the moment. And we talk about things like emotional awareness all the time, but the reason why that is so critical is because a lot of us can get so caught up in I'm checking off the boxes, taking care of the kids, doing the job, going to school, whatever your day looks like, because we're just so I'm checking the box focused and we're not really doing an internal inspection of like, how am I functioning? How am I feeling? Do I like my life? Do I like how I feel about my life? Do I like how I feel about myself? We don't pause to consider those things. And so we just go on with life as normal. And I think in the case of high functioning depression, a lot of it is, do I want my life to continue in this way? Because we can certainly do it. There are a lot of people who don't go to therapy, who don't decide to touch certain issues in their life, and that's completely your choice. But do I want to? Even if I could do it, do I want to live that way? And I think therapy for me is something that I always hope could be more preventative than like reactive. And I say that because if we wait till it gets really, really bad, it is so much harder. When you have clients come in and they are really low, they're really depressed, that is a very steep hill to climb with them. And it's so difficult because life is still happening and everything just feels 10 times harder, right? But if we can come in when things are middle of the road or when things aren't as bad as they could be, therapy really can, we can tweak some things, we can tidy up certain spaces, and it can be a preventative measure from things getting to that point. So I don't know about you, Sharice, but I always love, hey, come in before it gets really bad.
I love therapy as a preventative measure because, like Gabrielle was saying, it's so true. If you wait until it gets really bad, that's when things can repeat. And so, especially with major depressive disorder, if you experience one, you're more likely to have more in the future. And that's so difficult. And so, I think, if you do have any symptoms of depression, it's good to come in just like you're at the doctor getting checked. What's going on? Do I need to have coping skills? Do I need to find different ways to address this? And with persistent depressive disorder, what I find sometimes is that people will try to self-medicate. And so they'll try to fix it on their own. And they'll try to do these coping skills, and it helps momentarily. For example, they might go to substances. So it helps for that moment. It helps for this time in their life. But then, after a while, they're like, why am I not getting better? And now I have this substance problem. So now I have two things going on. Yep. And so it no longer becomes preventative. It becomes we have to treat this one thing that you didn't even initially have. Like you didn't have the substance before the depression. Yep. The depression was there first, but we did something else to cope. And now it's creating more issues. And not to mention that it can lead to other mental health disorders too. Like if you are functioning, well, but you're flooding yourself on the inside, like you're drowning and you don't know how to get out of it, that can cause a lot of anxiety. It's like, I want to be perfect. I want to present this image. Everyone puts me on this pedestal. Oh my goodness, I have to live up to this expectation that I never set. I am so anxious about life and I can't enjoy life. And so there's different things that can develop. And so I definitely think making sure that you're catching on to these symptoms, it's like I said, going for a physical, you do that because it's like, I want to make sure that my body is healthy. I don't know exactly what's going on with my body because I'm not a doctor. And so they're going to check me out, give me a good bill of health, and then I'm over it for the next year. Like I can, wait until the next year. Same thing, you can come into therapy just to check off, how am I doing mentally? Can this therapist see things that I don't see? And I think with persistent depressive disorder, that's what therapists see. They see things that the client doesn't necessarily understand what's going on because, like I said, they're functioning. And so it doesn't seem like anything is wrong. And then the client sometimes can have a tendency to minimize, like, it's not that bad, I'm okay.
I think therapy, and I live by this as a personal philosophy, it really is a mirror, because when you come to therapy, I think you can be presented not with what the therapist wants to show you, but literally they can reflect back what it is that you're bringing in. I think, Sharice and I work with relational clients a bunch, and it's interesting how people can be in relationships or in families and think that this is completely normal because they've done it for so many years, right? Like, this is how my family communicates, or this is how me and my partner argue or solve problems, or whatever the case is. you are so familiar with the situation that it feels normal. Not realizing that if you were to come to someone who is trained to look at things from a different perspective, whoa, this pattern that you have here is problematic for these reasons. And again, that takes courage to want to do, because it is uncomfortable that I've been doing something a certain way for so many years, and I have someone kind of waving a flag and saying, hey, maybe we should do it differently. And I don't know about all therapists, but I will say that therapists who genuinely want to do the best for their clients, they don't point out patterns because they're bored.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we don't just sit around like, ooh, what can I talk about today? Right? If we're going to highlight a pattern, it's because we really clinically believe that if we don't address this, a bigger problem could surface in the future. And with high functioning depression, I love that Sharice brought up the substance component, for example, because there are a lot of people who, well, I'll medicate, self-medicate, meaning I'll just have a glass of wine when I get off work to calm my nerves or to deal with the fact that I'm just not having a lot of energy or I'm really tired or overwhelmed. And if I keep doing that, at some point, one glass of wine may not do it. So I'm going to do two. Then now I need a whole bottle. Then maybe it's, okay, I need 2 bottles, or maybe I need to change up what I'm drinking, right? And we do these things not realizing we're trying to fix the symptom of depression, but we're creating another problem, okay? And it's the same thing. I think if we're functioning well enough for a little bit of time and we're going to work, we're taking care of our hygiene, things like that, if for so long we keep forcing ourselves to show up in that way, we can create another problem. And we tend to forget that because it's working right now. Therapists don't care just about right now. We care about, a month from now, 3 months from now.
You said something really important, which is like forcing things. And so that made me think about clients can have this idea like, I'm not happy, so now I need to change my pattern. And so they force different things like, I need to go into this different career, I need to go into this relationship, I need to do this new hobby. And it creates this like cyclical pattern where you're chasing something, and it's like that destination happiness of, if I get to this destination, I'm going to be so happy. And they actually get there and they're not happy. And so you can also create this pattern that's chasing something and you're never really fulfilled. And so then you're also asking yourself, like, what is it about me that can't achieve something that's going to make me happy? And so then you start to feel really bad about yourself. And so there's so many patterns that can happen here when we're talking about high functioning depression.
Yeah.
So many different things that could be happening. And so I think it's definitely important to be preventative. And I think one thing that I also see is that sometimes it's harder to get these clients in therapy because they're so good at like pushing through the feeling. And so they'll have this feeling like, I'm not happy, or I feel really sad, or I feel guilty, I feel anxious, but hey, like I said, everything is going well. I have nothing to complain about. And so they push through those negative feelings and they think that it just comes with their territory. It comes with all the responsibilities they have, all the things that they're doing, and it feels normal to them. But like Gabrielle was saying, I love that point, is when you get to therapy, we don't just sit there and reflect on things to be mean or to be, to push you in a direction. We want you to explore that and see the different possibilities, because we see long-term what it can look like for you.
Yeah. And this may not be the case for everybody, but for a lot of people who struggle with high functioning depression, they are also high achievers. Yes. And I want to pause and, commend you on the fact that if you are dealing with high functioning depression and you're also a high achiever, kudos to you, hats off to you. Do not think that because you struggle with anything, high functioning depression or not, that is a sign of weakness, because it is not. Dealing with any type of emotional or mental challenge is incredibly strong. It's incredibly brave. That is not a weakness of any kind. That means that you are trying to show up for life regardless of those circumstances. And I don't care if it's anxiety, major depressive, persistent depressive, the fact that you are, trying to continue to wake up every day and do this thing called life, knowing that sometimes you feel challenged, you deserve a pat on the back, you deserve a high five. So do not think that if I have high functioning depression, or I admit that I have high functioning depression, that I am weak in some way, or that I'm not, an achiever anymore. You are still an amazing achiever, and you've achieved so much. We want you to achieve something else, which is making you a priority.
Yeah. And life is already hard, and so I definitely like the point of making yourself a priority, because you can never do that enough. When you show up for yourself, you can show up for everything else to the best of your ability. So if you have all these things happening, you're working, you have children, you're a spouse, you're a daughter, whatever, you can show up in those roles way more and be more present if you're able to show up for yourself and make yourself that priority. And so I think what that looks like for me when it comes to coping is listening to your body. And so, hey, I'm really tired today. I really don't have energy. This task takes a lot for me to do. can you make a list of what you can get done today? And if you can't get it done, what can you put off till tomorrow? Do I need to prioritize resting? Do I need to prioritize getting with my social circles and venting, or, just having a good night out instead of focusing on what I need to do at home? Do I need to read a book? Do I need to relax? Do I need to go to the spa? I think it's constantly addressing what do I need in a very moment, because it can come up randomly. You might feel good at work, and then you get home and it's like, wow, I'm really drained. And instead of doing housework or doing things that, are on your to-do list, do I need to reassess and do something else for me so that I can show up when I'm ready to go to work the next day or do other responsibilities at a later time and date? And so always constantly asking yourself what you need. And sometimes that can make you feel guilty, because it's like, do I deserve to be able to put this task down and take care of me? And what I'll say to that is challenge those thoughts of guilt. Guilt is not really an emotion. It is, but it's from what we tell ourselves. And so I tell my clients, guilt is how you feel about a situation or what you tell yourself. And so if I feel guilty because I didn't do a chore, I might be telling myself I'm lazy or I don't deserve a break. And so it comes directly from what I tell myself. And so look at that thought and reframe it. No, I'm not lazy. I just am putting myself first because I'm so tired. If I do this task, what is it going to get me? Like, kind of weighing those pros and cons. And then also, like, if you're highly critical of yourself, asking yourself, what would you tell a friend? Your friend comes to you, they're so tired, they don't want to do the dishes. Would you tell them, no, girl, go do the dishes, don't be so lazy? You probably would be like, oh, it's okay, the dishes can wait, right? You would be supportive. And so being that empathetic and supportive person towards yourself, just like you are for everyone else.
This is probably going to have to be another episode, but my point with like how to cope with this is, number one, stop caring about what people think and trying to please people. Because when you're on this journey, if we are functioning, high functioning depression, and we're trying to wear all the hats and do all the things, there's the probability that we also care a lot about showing up for the things that we agree to do, or the commitments that we have, or the people in our life. And sometimes, to Sharice's point, when we are prioritizing like what I can do and what I can manage, that involves saying no. That involves turning away, stepping down, taking a back seat, something like that. And it's going to be harder to do that if I'm really like married to someone else's opinion of me. Like if I care a ton about what people think about me, then I may not step back from that board position, or I may not say no to that work opportunity or to that social event, something like that. But if that's what you need, to just turn down that functioning for a second and say, this is what I need to prioritize, this is the type of rest that I need you to do that. And so we'll have to talk at a later time about maybe how to overcome people pleasing. But for those who may be dealing with high functioning depression, learning what your needs are and then doing actions and activities that honor that need. Because if I'm busy and I'm always doing things that I have to do, maybe I don't take on anything extra, and I do have to quote unquote disappoint somebody, or I have to tell somebody, actually, no, I can't come to that, or actually, no, I can't take on that extra assignment, whatever. And we're gonna have to work through those feelings, which is why therapy, again, is really great, because when you're trying to make those changes, such as putting, your needs first and things like that, it may come with some guilt. It may come with some, man, I'm letting somebody down. But to Sharice's point earlier, it's going to be really hard for you to show up in any capacity for someone else, for a job, organization, relationship, etc., in a healthy way if you're not first taking care of yourself. And I think the danger is, if we keep expending ourselves at the expense of someone else, eventually we don't do well. Like, our immune system gives out on us, our emotional system stops functioning, and we have to do a hard reset, and then we have to pick ourselves up from scratch.
Right. I think that's such a good point. People pleasing is going to be such a good episode in the future. I love that topic. But that just shows how this can present many different ways. But I definitely think, if you're trying to get over this at home and you're trying to function in a way that's more optimal for you, I would say watch out for doing the steps that Gabrielle was saying, and me for coping. And the guilt comes up and it feels like I can't follow through with this anymore. That is a sign that's like, hey, I'm giving into the guilt, and the guilt is so large that I can't function past it. And so I need to get some help to figure out how I can restructure my thoughts, because it is difficult. And people will also make you feel guilty too. So if you are taking a back seat and putting boundaries down and saying no to things, people are not used to you doing that yourself. You're not used to yourself doing that. And so I think Gabrielle earlier was mentioning your brain likes the familiar. You've been doing this pattern, it's familiar. And so when you step out, even if you're really intentional about doing it, your brain might say, hey girl, what you doing? Like, get back in line, why'd you say no to that thing? That would have been great. And so if you find yourself kind of re-stepping and saying, okay, I'm going to reconsider that decision and make a different decision now after I already said no, I would say I think that's a sign that's like it's too big to handle on your own, and that's not a bad thing. I don't feel like a burden. That's okay. Some things we have to unlearn.
Yeah.
It's not about learning new things, it's about unlearning what we've taught ourselves, and our brain is going to stick to that familiar piece forever and ever. And it's not you. It's not like you're, like Gabrielle was saying, weak or you can't do it. It's that your brain is really trained to go after what's familiar. And so I would say if you're noticing those signs, like you're really trying, but it feels like you can't get past a certain hump, definitely reach out to help. You know, you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah. And I would say maybe my takeaway or the last point that I could make about coping with, high functioning depression is we don't have to make things all or nothing, good or bad. If you are dealing with high functioning depression and you're trying to learn how to cope, and maybe you recognize that I've got to start setting up some healthy boundaries or changing my priorities, things like that. I hear a lot of people say, oh, but they're such a good person, or that's such a good opportunity, or this would be such a good thing. And we don't have to villainize what we're having to say no to or what we're having to step back from. Those could all be valid, excellent, great things. But just because something is good or has value doesn't mean that it's valuable for you right then. It may not be what's best for you in the moment. And I think sometimes because something sounds good or they're a good person or this is a good opportunity, we automatically assume we have to do it right then. And it's okay to say not right now. And so that would be my takeaway, is recognizing, even if it is great and it's wonderful, if that's too much for you to do right now, or you recognize, hey, I would go ahead and agree to do it anyway, knowing that it's going to be really hard for me, you can pause and say, you know what, not right now. It's excellent. I would love to do that in the future, but right now I have too much on my plate, and that's okay.
Yeah. Listen, okay? Gabrielle's preaching over here. The amount of times that I hear in couples therapy or individual or just like, they're a good person, or, it's a great opportunity. Two things can be true at once, right? And I have to kind of break that down. It's like, yes, they can be great. This opportunity can be great, but is it right for you? Those two things can be separate, right? It can also not be the right time. And so there's a lot of factors to consider. But if you are stuck on this thought that it's going to elevate me because it's a great opportunity, well, yeah, it might, but what's the cost of that? I'm here to show you that, hey, you've been complaining about how you're functioning, or you've been really struggling with that. Do you think that that's going to be the best decision for you? Yeah, it might be a great accomplishment in the books, like Gabrielle was saying, we're going to check off that box, but do you think that it's really going to be a long-term sustainable thing for you? And usually that's no. Sometimes, though, people have to experience it to understand it, though. And so I'm here to support you with whatever. But it is looking at that two things can be true at once, and we don't have to go to extreme thinking. We don't have to go into two categories of I need to do this all the way or I need to do nothing at all. We can live in the middle. We can say no to some things and say yes to others, right? Balance, living in that middle area. We love it. And so I think that would be my takeaway. Do you have anything else for this episode?
No. Listen, don't forget that y'all can reach out to us with questions. I think this is a really excellent episode. So if any of these things ring true for you, or you want, more information, you want us to point you in a different direction to maybe get help or resources, let us know. But I think we gave some really, really good information today.
Yeah, I'm so excited for season 4, you guys. Thank you guys for being here for the second episode. If you want to give us any topics, or like Gabrielle said, any questions, please reach out to us. We have our subscription service as well. And so there's more longer episodes on that service if you want to sign up. But if you have any questions, you can find us at In Session the Podcast on Instagram. And we have a Facebook group, In Session Podcast, on Facebook. And our email is insessionthepodcast@gmail.com. So if you have any questions, just reach out. But we'll be looking forward to seeing you for episode 3. Thank you guys so much, and we'll be back for more next week.